Emma Hayes walked slowly along the dusty dirt road, balancing baby Benjamin in her arms. The little one, barely a year old, whimpered softly, bothered by the cold morning air. Beside her, Grace, her 6-year-old daughter, walked barefoot, her hair loose and her expression showing the determination of someone who already knew life's hardships. Emma's clothes were worn. Her skirt had patches in several places, and her blouse had long lost its original color. But there was a resilient beauty about her, a dignity that time and difficulties couldn't erase. They lived in a wooden shack on the verge of collapse, with cracks that let in wind and rain. On the dirt floor, there was only one worn mattress for the 3 of them to sleep on. Emma did odd cleaning jobs when opportunities appeared, but workdays were rare, and what little money she earned barely covered food. Grace, even so young, could sense her mother's pain. Many nights, the girl would wake up and see Emma crying silently, hugging the baby. In those moments, Grace would come closer, run her little hand across her mother's face, and say, "Mama, I'm going to ask God for a little house for us. He'll listen, I know it." Emma would smile through tears, without strength to contradict her daughter's childlike faith. It was on one of those desperate days that Grace heard rumors in the village. There was a very rich man living in a secluded mansion, but his health was failing. His name was Victor Thornfield. A former oil tycoon, a man who once had everything, power, prestige, influence, now depended on a walker to move around. His body, once imposing, had been defeated by a degenerative disease that robbed his legs of strength. Grace didn't fully understand what being a millionaire meant, but she knew rich meant having lots of money. And money, to her, meant only one thing: a small, safe house where her mother could sleep without fear of the roof caving in. That morning, as they walked in search of some food, Grace spotted the gates of the large property. Her eyes lit up. "Mama, it's here," she said, pulling on Emma's skirt. "This is where the rich man lives." Emma was startled. Approaching a mansion of that size seemed audacious, but before she could stop her, Grace ran to the iron gate and grabbed the bars with her tiny hands. On the other side, a gardener watched curiously. Shortly after, Victor Thornfield himself appeared. He moved slowly with the help of his walker. He had graying hair, a face marked by time and suffering, and a cold gaze, accustomed to keeping people at a distance. "What's this girl doing here?" he asked in a deep voice. Emma ran to pull her daughter back, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, sir. She doesn't understand. We're leaving now." But Grace didn't let go of the gate. She looked firmly at the man before her and, with the innocence of someone who speaks without fear, declared, "Mister, help me get a little house for my mama, and I'll heal you." Silence spread like a shock. Emma froze, not knowing where to hide her face. Victor's eyes widened, and for a moment his seriousness gave way to a muffled laugh, which soon exploded into roaring laughter. He laughed out loud, leaning on his walker to keep his balance. You said you're going to heal me?" he repeated, still laughing. "A little girl like you? That's hilarious!" Grace didn't back down. Her brown eyes sparkled with conviction. "Yes, if you help Mama, I'll ask Jesus to heal you. He listens to children." Emma tried to pull her daughter away again, desperate to end the embarrassment. "Grace, please, don't talk like that. Let's go." But something in Victor's heart trembled. The girl's sincerity touched him, even though he hid it under laughter. It had been years since he'd heard anyone speak with such faith. "Bold child," he murmured, trying to regain his coldness. "There's no cure for me, and you shouldn't be here." The gardener made a motion to expel them, but Victor raised his hand and stopped him. He continued looking at Grace with a mixture of sarcasm and curiosity. "So tell me, little girl, what makes you think you can change my life?" Grace gripped the bars tighter and answered without hesitation. "Because I believe, and because I want to see my mama happy." Emma cried silently behind her daughter. She wanted to run from there, but something in the little one's firmness stopped her. Victor finally gave a long sigh. His tired eyes stared at the little girl as if seeing a distant memory, perhaps from when he himself believed in something greater than money. "Go home, girl," he said in a less harsh voice. "I have nothing to give today." Grace nodded slowly, but before leaving, she added, "I'll keep asking until you believe too." And then, holding her mother's hand, she walked away from the gate. Victor remained motionless, watching the two disappear down the dirt road. Laughter no longer came to him. Instead, he felt a strange pang in his chest, a mixture of discomfort and hope. That night, Emma could barely sleep. Her heart was heavy with shame over what had happened at Victor Thornfield's gate. It wasn't just the millionaire's mocking laughter that hurt her, but the fear that her daughter had lost her innocence by being ridiculed. In the small shack where they lived, rain dripped through cracks in the roof, falling into makeshift buckets. Benjamin slept curled up against his mother's chest, while Grace remained awake, staring into the darkness. "Mama," the girl whispered, "the man laughed at me, didn't he?" Emma closed her eyes, trying to avoid tears. "He didn't understand, honey. You just wanted to help." But Grace didn't seem shaken. On the contrary, there was a gleam of firmness in her childish voice. "I promised Jesus I'd keep asking until I succeed, so I'm going back." Emma sat up in bed and looked at her, worried. "Honey, we can't keep bothering people. He's an important man. He won't want to talk to people like us." "But I didn't ask for me," Grace insisted, adjusting herself on her side. "I asked for you, Mama. If it means you get a little house, I'll go back every day." Emma sighed deeply. How could she contradict a child's faith? What seemed impossible to adults was just a matter of perseverance to Grace. The next morning, Emma got up early to try another day of work. She found only a few clothes to wash in exchange for some food. While she scrubbed the fabrics in a makeshift basin, Grace helped take care of Benjamin. The girl seemed distracted, but deep down, she only thought of one thing: returning to the gate. And so she did. With her baby brother in her mother's arms, Emma was walking down the road when Grace bolted ahead, her bare feet kicking up dust. Her little heart beat fast with anxiety. There was the mansion again. The high walls, the iron gate, and the well-kept garden were like another world, distant from the poverty they knew. Grace grabbed the bars and called out loudly, "Mr. Thornfield, I came back!" On the other side, the gardener appeared again. He recognized the girl and wrinkled his nose. "Oh, you again? Go away, girl." But before he could shoo her away, Victor appeared slowly, leaning on his walker. His face showed the same seriousness, though his eyes showed curiosity. "So, the little girl doesn't give up, huh?" Grace smiled sweetly. "I said I'd come back. You need to believe you can be healed." Victor gave a brief laugh, but it was no longer mocking like before. It was more resigned irony. "There's no cure for me, girl. I've accepted my fate." "I haven't accepted it," retorted, shaking her head with conviction. As long as I keep asking, Jesus will listen." Emma, embarrassed, tried to explain. "Sir, forgive us once more. She's just a child. We don't want to bother you." But Victor interrupted her with a gesture. His eyes were fixed on Grace, as if there was something in that persistence that disarmed him. "You don't understand what you're saying. I've had the best doctors, spent fortunes on treatments. Nothing worked." "Because you didn't ask Jesus," answered without hesitation. Silence fell over everyone. The gardener looked astonished. Emma nearly collapsed from embarrassment. But Victor felt a tightness in his chest. It had been many years since he'd heard someone pronounce God's name in front of him. "And why would I believe you, girl?" he asked, as if testing her. Grace held the gate firmly and replied, "Because I won't stop asking. Every day I'll come back here until you have a little house in your heart for Jesus to enter." Victor looked away, trying to maintain his coldness. But as the girl and her mother walked away down the road, a strange sensation accompanied him. It was as if this child was opening a crack in his closed world of disbelief. That night, Victor couldn't sleep well. He remembered the time when he was still young, before the disease. He'd had everything: wealth, power, flatterers, but deep down, he lived alone. He never allowed faith to have space in his life. For him, everything was a matter of money and control. Now, with his body weakened and confined to a walker, he found himself before a poor little girl who dared to speak of hope as if it were the simplest thing in the world. And worse, part of him wanted to believe. He shook his head, irritated with himself. "Nonsense," he muttered. "Children say anything." But the echo of Grace's voice wouldn't leave his thoughts. "I won't accept it. I'll ask every day." On the other side, in the shack, Emma was also reflecting. She was worried about her daughter's insistence, but deep down, there was something in her faith that comforted her. When she saw Grace on her knees, praying in silence, she felt that perhaps God really was listening. The girl, in her simple prayers, always repeated the same phrase: "Jesus, give my mama a little house and heal the man with the walker." It was a short prayer, but filled with the purity only a child could have. The next morning, Grace was already impatient. She wanted to go back to the gate. Emma resisted, but eventually gave in. She didn't want to extinguish the spark of hope in her daughter's eyes. And so, for the third time, Victor found her there, smiling, determined, clinging to the bars. "I said I'd come back," Grace announced, as if delivering good news. This time, Victor didn't laugh. He stood in silence for a few seconds, analyzing this skinny little girl who dared challenge him to believe again. Something inside him began to change. Victor awoke early that morning, earlier than usual. Since the disease arrived, his days always began slowly, dragging, as if each movement were a burden. But there was something different now, a strange expectation. He walked with difficulty to the mansion's veranda, firmly supported by the walker. His gaze swept the horizon until it settled on the dirt road. And there she was. Grace came running, her bare feet marking the dust, her loose hair bouncing in the wind. Behind her, Emma carried Benjamin, worried. It was the third time in a few days they'd appeared. Victor sighed. Part of him wanted to order the gates closed, that no one let those people come near again. But another part, deeper and more uncomfortable, wanted to see how far this little girl's boldness would go. When Grace reached the bars, she smiled with the same brightness as the first day. "Good morning, Mr. Thornfield. I came again." He arched his eyebrows, feigning impatience. "I noticed. Seems you're not afraid to be a nuisance." "I'm not a nuisance," Grace replied innocently. "I just want you to be healed." Emma cleared her throat, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir. I try to stop her, but she won't listen." Victor raised his hand, asking for silence. His gaze was fixed on Grace. "Very well, girl. You insist so much. So let's do a test." Grace blinked curiously. "What test?" Victor adjusted himself on the walker, straightening his shoulders. "You said you can heal me. Well then, do it now. Here and now." Emma's eyes widened, shocked. "Sir, please, she's just a child." But Grace remained firm, without fear. She pressed her face against the cold bars and said calmly, "I'm not the one who heals. It's Jesus, but I can ask him." Victor laughed, a bitter laugh. "Then ask. I want to see if he hears you." The girl closed her eyes, put her little hands together, and murmured a simple prayer. "Jesus, heal Mr. Thornfield. Show him that you're greater than any disease." Silence. Only the distant song of a bird that had perched on the wall. Victor waited, but nothing happened. His legs remained weak, his body remained heavy. He let out a sarcastic laugh. "See? Nothing changed. I knew it." Grace opened her eyes and answered with serenity. "Just because you didn't feel it now doesn't mean Jesus didn't hear. He's already taking care of it." This answer irritated him. He was used to having control of things, demanding immediate results. His world always functioned on the basis of orders and money. But this girl wasn't discouraged. "You're too young to understand," he said more curtly. "The world doesn't work on faith. It works on strength, power, wealth. I conquered all that, and still, look where I am." Grace looked at him with the innocence of someone who sees beyond appearances. "You conquered things, but you didn't conquer peace." Those words pierced Victor like an arrow. For a moment, he didn't know what to answer. Emma, fearing reprisals, pulled her daughter to leave. "Let's go, Grace. We've bothered him enough." But before leaving, the girl looked at Victor once more and said, "I'll keep asking, every day, until you believe." That night, Victor was disturbed. Sitting in his leather armchair, he observed the luxurious mansion around him. Everything he had conquered now seemed empty. The girl's words echoed without ceasing. "You conquered things, but you didn't conquer peace." He remembered his youth. He worked day and night, accumulating wealth, believing money was the answer to everything. He never made space for feelings, never valued people around him. Now, weakened, surrounded only by employees paid to obey, he felt lonelier than ever. "A poor child dares to say she can give me what money couldn't buy," he thought. Distrust grew in him, but along with it, restlessness. What if, just for an instant, there was truth in that? Meanwhile, in the shack, Emma gently scolded Grace. "Honey, we can't keep showing up there. Mr. Thornfield is powerful. He could have us expelled by force." But Grace shook her head, determined. "He didn't send us away. He's just angry because he doesn't believe yet." Emma sighed. "You speak with such certainty, Grace. Sometimes it even scares me." The girl smiled and lay down beside her mother and baby brother. "It's because I know Jesus will do it. I promised." In the following days, Grace kept her word. Every morning she returned to the gate. Sometimes Victor appeared, other times he just watched from a distance through the window. He wanted to prove to himself that the girl would give up. But to his surprise, she never gave up. "Good morning, Mr. Thornfield," she always said, with a smile that lit her face. "I came to ask again." And she made the same short, simple prayer, but full of faith. Each passing day, Victor's distrust began to mix with something new. It wasn't belief yet, but it was like a crack in his fortress of disbelief. Until one morning, after the prayer, Grace added something different. "Jesus, give Mama a little house and show Mr. Thornfield that he's not alone." The word alone echoed deep within him. No one knew, but loneliness was his greatest pain. More than the disease, more than the walker, what consumed him most was the absence of someone who truly cared. When Grace and Emma walked away, Victor remained motionless on the veranda, his eyes glistening. For the first time in many years, he felt his chest tighten, not from physical pain, but from something that seemed like longing. The sun was all rising strong that morning when Grace, with her usual energy, pulled her mother's hand to go to the mansion's gate. Emma, though tired, no longer tried to resist so much. Something different was happening, and she herself began to wonder if, in fact, her daughter's faith wasn't opening invisible paths. Victor, on the other hand, was already waiting on the veranda. In recent days, he'd gotten used to hearing the girl's little footsteps running down the dirt road. Against his will, he began to wait for it. It was as if Grace's laughter had become the only sound capable of breaking through the heavy silence of his mansion. When the girl appeared clinging to the bars, she opened a bright smile. "Good morning, Mr. Thornfield. I said I'd come back, didn't I?" Victor adjusted himself on the walker and, instead of being ironic, asked, "Tell me something, girl. Why do you believe so much that this God of yours will heal me?" Grace blinked her brown eyes, surprised by the question. "Because he's my friend. He's never left me." Victor frowned. "Never left you? You live in a house falling apart, you don't have enough to eat, your mother works herself to death, and you still dare say he hasn't left you?" Emma, embarrassed, lowered her eyes, but Grace answered with childish firmness, "It's that we're still alive, and he always listens when I ask." Victor fell silent, thoughtful. That simple answer disconcerted him. In recent years, he had thought countless times that his life was no longer worth living. He had everything in material terms, but felt abandoned. Now he heard from a poor child that she still felt cared for. "You talk as if he were real," he said, almost in a whisper. "But he is," Grace insisted, opening an innocent smile. "You just need to let him into your heart." In the following days, the scene repeated. But now it wasn't just Grace who spoke. Victor began to ask questions. "What's your life like?" he inquired one morning. Emma took a deep breath, embarrassed to expose her pain. But Grace, with a child's sincerity, answered without beating around the bush. "Our house is very old. Water comes in when it rains. Mama works a lot, but the money never lasts. Sometimes we go to sleep hungry, but I always ask Jesus to send us a little house." Victor swallowed hard. Inside, he felt a pang of shame. The mansion where he lived had rooms that were never used, abundant tables he rarely touched, and yet these 3 lives survived in conditions he'd never experienced. "And you never gave up asking?" he asked, curious. "No," Grace answered firmly, "because I know that one day he'll listen." Victor's gaze was lost on the horizon. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so certain of anything. That night, alone in the mansion, Victor couldn't get rid of the girl's words. He walked slowly to the bedroom, supported by the walker, but instead of lying down, he sat on the edge of the bed and ran his hands over his face. "My entire life," he thought. He remembered his youth, the rush to build an empire. He never allowed himself to believe in anything that couldn't be bought. But now, with failing health and no one by his side, he realized that all the money in the world hadn't given him peace. Could she be right? Could this God she talks about so much really exist? In the shack, Grace was also awake. She looked at the ceiling full of leaks and whispered her prayer. "Jesus, thank you for listening. Please give Mama a little house and don't let Mr. Thornfield feel alone." Emma, who was pretending to sleep, let a tear escape. Deep down, she was beginning to feel that something supernatural really was in motion. The next day, Victor surprised them both when he said, "I want you to come in." The gardener's eyes widened, incredulous. No one from that village had ever been allowed to cross the gate. But Grace jumped for joy, clapping her little hands. "I said Jesus would open your heart." Emma, hesitant, held the baby tight and entered slowly. The mansion was dazzling. Marble floors, expensive paintings, heavy curtains. To her, it seemed like another planet. Victor led them to the veranda. With effort, he sat in a chair and faced Emma. "Your daughter, she's different. I've never seen such conviction in someone so small." Emma smiled timidly. "Grace has always believed. Even when we have nothing, she insists on being grateful. I try to follow her faith." Victor ran his trembling hand over his face. "I spent my whole life believing only in money, and now, with so much, I feel empty." Grace approached and held his hand without fear. "You don't need to feel empty. You can ask Jesus to come in. He fills everything." For a moment, Victor couldn't respond. He felt a tear well up in his tired eyes. It had been years since he'd cried. From that day on, Emma and the children began to be received more frequently. Victor began to hear stories of their lives, and in return, he told about his past. He spoke of his youth, his ambition, the sleepless nights to multiply his fortune. He also spoke of the loneliness that consumed him. With each conversation, Grace listened attentively and always said the same thing. "You're not alone. I'll keep asking until you're well." Victor, who initially distrusted, now found himself moved. The mansion no longer seemed so silent. Grace's laughter echoed through the corridors, and little Benjamin's crying sounded like life where before there was only emptiness. And for the first time in decades, Victor began to believe that perhaps there was still a miracle reserved for him. The days following the conversation on the veranda marked an unexpected change in Victor's routine. Although he still depended on the walker, he began to notice small improvements. Movements that were once painful became less difficult. Long minutes sitting no longer seemed so exhausting. He himself was surprised, but out of pride, he didn't comment anything to the employees. Grace, as always, was present every morning. She entered the mansion's garden with joy, running through the flower beds, watching the birds, and never missed the chance to look at Victor with that smile that seemed capable of melting any hardened heart. "Good morning, Mr. Thornfield," she'd say, clapping her hands. "Today I'm going to ask again." He just smiled sideways, without words. But each morning, each small prayer from the girl began to produce effects he couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Emma took advantage of each visit to talk with him. She told about the day's difficulties, about Grace's school, about the small miracles that happened even in the shack. Victor listened attentively, more interested than he'd ever been in anyone's life besides his own. One afternoon, after another visit, he was surprised by a sensation he hadn't felt in years, a gentle peace, almost magical, taking over his chest. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, remembering the girl's words. "You're not alone." Instinctively, he ran his hand over his arm and felt different firmness in his legs. An intense emotion rose from his heart to his throat, and he swallowed hard. "It's impossible," he murmured to himself. But each day, the small improvements accumulated. It wasn't just physical strength. There was also something in his soul. The man who laughed at Grace's faith began to recognize that he needed it more than he'd ever needed an expensive doctor or medicine. Emma noticed subtle changes too. When leaving the mansion, she noticed that Victor was becoming more patient, less harsh. Sometimes, before saying goodbye, he would ask questions about the girls' lives, about the small details of a difficult daily life that he would have previously ignored. "Do you eat every day?" he asked, hesitant, one morning. Emma was surprised by the genuine concern. Grace approached and placed her hand on his, like someone comforting someone bigger and older. Victor swallowed the emotion that threatened to overflow. For the first time in decades, he felt part of something bigger. It wasn't just about money or luxury. It was real life. It was care. It was love that couldn't be bought. That same week, an unexpected event shook the millionaire's heart. A doctor who regularly visited him entered the room bringing test results. "Mr. Thornfield, I can't explain exactly, but it seems your mobility is improving faster than expected." He looked cautiously at the patient. "Maybe it's the effect of some new treatment, or," he lowered his voice, "or something I can't measure." Victor swallowed hard, trying to hide his emotion. He remembered each of Grace's words, each short prayer but full of faith that now seemed to reverberate inside his body. "It can only be that," he murmured, not wanting to admit to anyone that he was beginning to believe in miracles. Meanwhile, the girl remained firm. Every day after the visits, she ran through the mansion's garden, collecting flowers, playing with small birds that approached the veranda, and repeated her prayers. Each gesture, each word seemed to vibrate positive energy, as if her pure heart was indeed attracting blessings. Emma, watching, began to feel a mixture of joy and hope. For the first time in months, she felt that perhaps a better future could exist for her family. She couldn't explain it, but she saw clear signs that something extraordinary was happening. "Grace, you're right," she said with tears in her eyes. "Jesus is taking care of us." The girl smiled, very satisfied. "I told you, Mama, faith is strong." And then, on a day that seemed ordinary, something happened that no one expected. During the visit, Victor decided to take a few steps without support. First hesitant, then firm. Emma and Grace were speechless, unable to believe what they were seeing. "Mr. Thornfield, you're walking!" Emma exclaimed, holding Benjamin in her arms and running to support him. He stopped, felt the strength returning to his legs, and looked at Grace with glistening eyes. I He began, but couldn't finish. Words failed before the emotion he felt. The girl, full of joy, jumped and clapped. "I said Jesus would do it!" The miracle wasn't just physical. Victor also felt a lightness in his heart that he hadn't known for a long time. For the first time, he understood that faith, even coming from a child, could deeply touch even the most hardened soul. From that moment on, a new relationship was established among them. Emma began to feel more confident, Grace more determined, and Victor more human than ever. What once disbelief, sarcasm, and loneliness was now transforming into hope, care, and even silent love. The daily visits were no longer just requests from a girl. They became encounters of learning, faith, and gratitude. Each prayer reinforced the connection between the family, and each small gesture made the impossible increasingly possible. After the miracle that restored Victor's mobility, everyone's lives seemed transformed. Grace's faith and Emma's courage not only touched the millionaire's heart, but now also brought concrete changes. That morning, Emma woke up early, filled with a hope she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at the shack with glistening eyes. Though it was still fragile and simple, she could finally imagine a different future. A safe, clean home where her children could sleep without fear, eat every day, and grow with dignity. "Grace," she said while dressing the girl, "today we're going to do something important." The little one, with Benjamin in her lap, looked at her mother, curious. "What, Mama?" "We're going to show that we're ready to believe in real miracles. We're going to talk to Mr. Thornfield about our little house." Grace smiled, running ahead. "I said he would help." When they arrived at the mansion, Victor was already waiting for them on the veranda. His gaze had softened in recent days. The sarcastic laugh had disappeared, giving way to an almost paternal attention. When Grace approached, he smiled. "So, you came to talk about the little house, is that it?" Emma swallowed her emotion before speaking. "Mr. Thornfield, we have nothing, no house, not enough food. But if you could help us, we could get something safe, a small house, just to live with dignity." Grace, beside her mother, added, "I'll ask Jesus every day. And if you help, I promise to keep asking him to take care of you too." The millionaire leaned on the walker, surprised by the firmness of the girl's words. For a moment, he felt the weight of all the years of disbelief dissolving. Each visit, each daily prayer had planted something invisible but strong. "You really believe this, don't you?" Victor asked, more to himself than to them. "Yes," Grace answered, jumping and smiling, "because Jesus is faithful." Victor took a deep breath. For many years, he thought wealth and power could solve any problem. Now he understood that there were miracles no money could buy: faith, hope, and a pure heart. That same afternoon, Victor made a decision that would change Emma and her children's lives forever. He called his financial manager and, with clear and firm instructions, asked him to immediately buy a small house in a quiet neighborhood. Not a luxurious mansion, but a modest, safe, and welcoming home. While arrangements were being made, Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. Each detail of the process seemed like a distant dream becoming reality. She remembered the cold nights, the hunger, the insecurity, and now saw the possibility of a fresh start. "Grace," she said, hugging her daughter, "look, one day we'll have a little house of our own." The girl moved, jumped with joy. "I knew it! I said Jesus would listen." On the day the house was finally bought, Emma received the news from Victor personally. He was sitting on the veranda, his smile timid and full of emotion. "It's done," he said, almost having difficulty containing his joy. "You have a house now." Emma burst into tears, hugging her daughter and kissing baby Benjamin. "Mr. Thornfield, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," he replied, looking at Grace. "Maybe it's you, little one, who deserves all the thanks. Your faith taught me something no money could buy." Grace ran to him and held his hands. "I said we're not alone." Victor felt a deep emotion. For the first time, there was a genuine connection with another human being that didn't involve interest or power. A child's faith had transformed his life and was now transforming an entire family's life. Emma visited the new house shortly after, accompanied by Grace and Benjamin. The small space was simple but clean, with doors that closed, windows that protected from the wind, and a small yard where Grace could run and play freely. "Look, Mama," Grace exclaimed, "our real little house." Emma fell to her knees, touching the floor. "It's real, she said, hugging the children. "Jesus heard our prayers." Meanwhile, Victor watched from a distance. He hadn't just bought the house, he was also beginning to realize that true wealth lay in small things, in a child's smile, in the joy of a pure heart, in the love that was shared. The following days were of adaptation. Emma cleaned, tidied, and began decorating the new home with the few pieces of furniture she had. Grace helped enthusiastically, spreading toys and flowers she had picked from the yard. Benjamin explored every corner, laughing at each discovery. Victor began to visit them frequently, not just as a benefactor, but as someone genuinely interested. Each visit was accompanied by stories, laughter, and especially gratitude. Grace's faith had not only transformed his health, but the life of an entire family. The girl, only 6 years old, had taught the millionaire that miracles happen when the heart believes and perseveres. And so, that simple little house became a symbol of faith, hope, and rebirth. For Emma, for Grace, for Benjamin, and for Victor. Days passed, and each of Grace's visits to the mansion gate became a silent celebration of faith. Emma and the children now lived in their own little house, but remained close to Victor. He, who had once laughed at the girl, now awaited each visit with expectation and gratitude. What seemed impossible was happening before everyone. Small improvements transformed into firm steps, pains diminished, and the man who walked supported by a walker began to walk on his own. With each movement, a new confidence blossomed in his heart. One morning, Grace arrived running as always, holding Benjamin by the arm. "Good morning, Mr. Thornfield," she exclaimed, smiling. "Today, we're going to pray together." Victor smiled, now without the skepticism that once dominated him. He sat on the veranda and waited while the girl put her hands together and murmured, "Jesus, heal Mr. Thornfield completely. Show him he's never alone and that Mama and Benjamin are safe." He closed his eyes, felt each word touch his soul, and for the first time in a long time realized that the girl's faith had power. Slowly, he stood up, stretching his legs with full strength. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Emma, who was watching the scene from the gate, couldn't hold back her tears. "He's walking by himself, Grace," she said, moved. The girl clapped and shouted, "I said Jesus would do it! I knew it!" Victor, still trembling, looked at them both. Tears ran down his face. For the first time, he understood that miracles happen when you believe with your whole heart. In the following days, he became more involved with Emma's family in a closer way. He visited the newly bought little house, helped with small tasks, and most importantly, offered company and affection. Emma felt that his presence was like a bridge between the painful past and the future of hope opening before them. The physical miracle was visible, but the greatest miracle was internal. Victor let go of pride, distrust, and loneliness, replacing them with faith, compassion, and gratitude. He became someone capable of seeing value in people and in life's simple gestures. One day, Grace, animated, held the millionaire's hand and said, "Look, Mr. Thornfield, you can walk now, you smile. Now Mama and Benjamin have a house. The miracle happened." Victor felt his heart overflow. For years, he had sought solutions through money and science, but nothing compared to the strength of a child's faith and a mother's love who never gave up. He knelt slightly, leaning on the walker, and said with an emotional voice, "You taught me what I could never learn alone, that miracles exist when you believe, when you love, and when you persevere." Emma approached, moved, and held his hands. "Mr. Thornfield, without Grace's faith, none of this would have happened." The girl, with shining eyes, added, "I told you, didn't I? Jesus is faithful." At that moment, Victor understood that each prayer, each visit, each simple gesture of faith had made all the difference. He, who once laughed at the impossible, was now living proof that miracles happen when you trust in divine power. And the miracle wasn't just his. It was for the whole family. The little house finally offered security and dignity. Grace's faith strengthened all hearts, and Emma felt she could start over without fear. What began as a simple request transformed into a wave of hope that changed everyone's lives forever. Victor, now completely healed and walking without support, approached Emma and Grace. He looked into each one's eyes, feeling gratitude and sincere love. "I learned that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the heart, and you gave me that," he said, moved. Emma, emotional, replied, "Mr. Thornfield, we just believed, and it was Grace's faith that made it all happen." The girl smiled and held his hands, looking directly at him. "Never stop believing, Mr. Thornfield. Miracles happen when the heart doesn't give up." Victor nodded, feeling that each word carried the deepest truth he'd ever known. For the first time, he felt truly free. Free from pain, loneliness, and disbelief. In the following days, Emma and her family fully settled into the little house. Victor remained close, now not just as someone who helped, but as someone who learned to love, care for, and value the faith that changes lives. Each daily encounter was a celebration of hope, perseverance, and real miracles. Grace continued her prayers, but now with a different sparkle. She knew her faith had transformed lives, that the impossible had become possible, and that the miracle of trust and true love would never be forgotten. Victor also made one final decision. He established the Grace's Hope Foundation, dedicated to helping struggling families in Sandstone and surrounding communities. The foundation would provide housing, food, and support to those who, like Emma and her children, needed a miracle of their own. On the day of the foundation's inauguration, the entire community gathered. Victor stood before them all, walking firmly without a walker, without pain, and told the story of how a 6-year-old girl's faith had changed his life forever. "I was a man who believed in nothing but money," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "But grace showed me that the greatest power in this world is faith. Pure, persistent, unshakable faith. Because of her, I can walk again. Because of her, I found purpose again. And because of her, I'll spend the rest of my life helping others find their miracles too." Grace stood beside him, holding his hand, her small face beaming with joy. Emma held Benjamin, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter's impossible dream become not just reality, but a legacy that would touch countless lives. As the sun set over Sandstone, Texas, the iron gates of Thornfield Ranch stood open, no longer a barrier between wealth and poverty, between belief and doubt, but a doorway through which hope and miracles could freely flow. If this story touched your heart, the story of Grace, Emma, and Victor Thornfield reminds us of something powerful. Hope, perseverance, and the courage to believe can transform lives in ways we never imagined. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to give up, one child's determination, one mother's strength, one heart willing to change to create a ripple effect that changes everything. If this story moved you, we'd love your support. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe it's someone facing their own impossible situation. Maybe it's someone who's forgotten that change is possible. Your share could be exactly what someone needs right now. We're a new channel dedicated to bringing you moving stories that stay with you long after they end. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of story lovers. Question for you: have you ever met someone like Grace? Someone whose determination changed everything? Share your story in the comments. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for helping us grow. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next incredible story.